When a drone passes over a small town in Afghanistan, the residents notice and prepare for an attack right away. The village is deserted when a group of US forces eventually arrive because everyone is hiding indoors. The team keep moving, and when they come across a suspicious man carrying a bomb, they surround him right away and threaten to shoot him if he doesn't drop his weapon. The man tries to disregard the threat at first, but when he realizes the troops mean business, he pulls out a gun, forcing the soldiers to shoot him dead on sight. Jake then asks Colonel Mason for permission to disable the device after telling him about the dead man. Mason refuses, but Jake ignores him and works on it anyway, successfully disarming it. At that moment, a secret second bomb goes off and kills most of the soldiers. Soon the men come out of the buildings and surround the Americans as they open fire, and a vicious gunfight begins. American soldiers are falling everywhere, and only Jake and Mason are left alive. Jake runs to join his colonel and is almost shot by the enemy, but Mason saves his life right before a helicopter shows up. 5 years later, Jake is trying his best to deal with a new life as a civilian while taking medicine for his PTSD. He now works for Earl at his car dealership, where he must put in extra effort to cope with certain demanding customers. Jake returns home to spend time with his family after work. He constantly tries to maintain his son in a good mood, but when his wife brings up the fact that they have a lot of outstanding debts, things get heated behind closed doors. But Jake assures me that he will handle it as usual. Jake tells his son a story and shows him a picture of his old squad, mentioning that Mason was at the hospital when the baby was born. Mason asks if Jake has ever killed somebody, to which Jake responds that he hasn't spoken to him in a long time. When Jake gets to work the following day, he discovers some thugs who are saying that Earl owes them money. Fresh, the commander, sends his guys to beat Jake up when he tries to kick them out, but Jake easily overcomes them all with a wrench. Fresh shows him his gun to get him to stop, and then he and his group walk off, promising to return for another round later. When Jake confronts Earl later, he admits that he was a member of a gang as well, but was lucky enough to escape and create a place he could call home. Earl promises he'll always protect his block, so Jake doesn't need to worry about his family. After hearing his wife tell him he should have called the police rather than getting involved, Jake decides to check in on his family because he feels like he's still at war. When Jake gets home later that night, he finds Fresh in his car talking about getting even before he drives off. When a terrified Jake bursts through the door, he finds his family dead and goes into complete meltdown, screaming and crying. When the police try to question him a few moments later, Jake loses it and drives off in his vehicle. He drives through the city looking for Fresh's car while his mind keeps going through his happiest family memories. Eventually, he finds the car outside a naughty club, so Jake rushes inside with a gun in hand and begins shooting every single gang member without hesitation. When he is about to kill Fresh, the man explains that he hadn't meant to kill Jake's family, but he was given no choice. Jake is unaffected by this, and Fresh is also shot. 5 months later, while Jake is incarcerated for his crime, his PTSD worsens and he spends the majority of his days daydreaming about Fresh murdering his family. Mason surprises Jake one day by showing up and offering to assist reopen the investigation. But Jake declines, stating that he feels at home there and restating his statement to the judge that he got his retribution and doesn't regret it at all. He would even do it again. Subsequently, Jake requests that Mason never return and instructs the guard to return Mason to his cell. Jake can't stop thinking about his time in the army that night and how Mason had retired after saving his life. A man named Ramsey pays Jake a visit later on and says he is the head of a private task team, but Jake stops him from saying anything further and asks the guard to take him back once more. Later in the evening, Jake is dreaming about his family when suddenly, a bunch of masked men break into his cell and sedate him before kidnapping him. Later, when Jake awakens, he finds that he has been released from prison and that Ramsey, his kidnapper, has been observing Jake for a while and is impressed by his track record. Section 8. Ramsey's organization doesn't follow the rules, and Ramsey believes they can restore Jake's purpose. Finally, Jake agrees to participate after Ramsey notes that his son would rather see him as a hero than a prisoner. Later in Washington, D.C., Ramsey presents Jake to Elias, Ajax, Brunner, and Mueller, the other members of the team. Then he tells him they have 8 operatives in Washington and another 8 throughout the globe, and takes him on a tour of what he refers to as the Batcave. The NSA and the State Department are the ones who give them orders, and they are invariably tied to dealing with threats to national security. Mueller will be Jake's mentor when he gets started and accompany him on all missions until he achieves seniority. Since Jake is dead to the outside world, he will also receive a bank account, a car, a city residence, a backstory, and an alias. After that, Ramsey must depart, so the group must take Jake through the initiation procedure. Ajax begins to act aggressively against him, pushing and punching him. Jake tries to avoid them all and refuses to engage in combat, but Ajax gets so hostile that Jake loses it. He knocks Ajax to the ground and is about to stab him in the eye with a pen when he suddenly becomes calm after seeing a flashback of his family. After Jake departs, an irate Ajax argues that because Jake has demonstrated fear, he doesn't belong with them, but Mueller disputes this. Mueller and Jake board an aircraft later on and talk about Jake's first assignment. A man named Castillo, a defense contractor and weapons dealer, is the intended target. Jake's mission is to get the schematics and murder Castillo and his guys because he recently came into possession of some lethal schematics that he plans to sell to the Russians. After realizing they're just a bunch of assassins, Jake no longer looks forward to killing. When the two arrive in Mexico in the evening, they discover Castillo in a warehouse prepared to do a deal with a Russian negotiator. Jake surreptitiously kills a guard while Castillo and the Russian quarrel. The commotion sets both gangs against one another, leading to an argument that quickly erupts into a full-fledged gunfight as they believe the other is setting them up. The struggle eventually ends as the gang members start to die one by one and even blow up a car. After killing every survivor, Jake exits the vehicle and looks inside, where he finds two extremely terrified women. Ignoring them, Jake grabs the schematics and walks out. Jake receives criticism from Ramsey later at the base for jeopardizing the mission's credibility by leaving those two women alive. Jake attempts to clarify that they were victims and charges Ramsey of being indifferent to human life. In response, Ramsey threatens to return Jake to prison if he disobeys. Following Jake's dismissal, Mueller informs Ramsey that Jake performed well. However, Ramsey is still unsure, so Ajax intervenes and suggests that Ramsey erred. Once he's left alone, Ramsey calls someone named Locke. The next day in Nevada, mercenary Locke breaks into a hotel and kills a few employees before entering a room, where he scares away the women before confronting his victim. The man tries to buy Locke off with a large sum of money, knowing that Locke was sent by Ramsey, but Locke murders him anyhow. Following his escape through the hotel's casino, Locke is pursued by the guards, who get suspicious right away. Locke runs off, smashing objects along the way and taking out the guards who keep coming after, effortlessly beating up everyone who approaches. Eventually, he takes out his gun and shoots a few bullets just to cause panic in the gambling crowd. He also kills a guard before going outside and stealing a car to escape. Meanwhile, Jake moves into the new house and is shocked to find a frame with a bunch of pictures from his time in Afghanistan. This reminds him of a conversation he had with Mason, during which Jake blamed himself for getting him injured, and Mason made sure to comfort him. Later, Jake is drinking at the pub and Mueller joins him, so Jake tries to get some information out of her. Mueller doesn't know anything about Ramsey, but she explains that she used to be in the army and punched a commander officer that reprimanded her. After a while, Ramsey assigns them a new task. They have to kill Senator Graham, a traitor to the nation who has bought many people's freedoms, and obtain all digital evidence related to a delicate case. Ramsey urges everyone, especially Jake, that they need to fight back since security will be very strict. A few hours later, the group disguised as landscapers arrives at Graham's event in California. After Mueller enters the building covertly and kills every guard she can find, security eventually finds out and drives Graham away in a van. As Mueller breaches the senator's computer, Jake pursues Graham, firing a couple shots in vain. Because the van is moving too quickly for him, Jake decides to take a detour by hopping over a hill and blocks the traffic. When a guard tries to resist Jake, he kills him fast and moves on to Graham, who says he has a family and begs for his life. Suddenly overcome by memories, Jake chooses to give Graham his freedom, but when the crew arrives, Ajax murders Graham and then tells Jake not to think twice. Later at home, Jake struggles with his guilt and cries while looking at pictures and drinking. Suddenly, he sees masked men running outside his window, so he hides before they enter his home. The men look for him in every room, but Jake manages to escape through the back door. The next day, Jake goes to see Mason and tells him the whole story. Mason mentions he knew the real Section 8 was dismantled in the 90s, and the one functioning now is just a cesspool of disgraced agents from the Army, CIA, FBI, and the like. They even have important connections in Washington, so if Jake is running from Section 8, he's in serious danger. Mason has never heard of Ramsey and promises to make some calls. He also agrees to help Jake with some money and a gun. Afterward, Jake returns to his hometown and gets a call from Ramsey, who wants to meet to talk things out, but Jake refuses. Then Ramsey asks Mueller to call Locke, who is currently hiding in Argentina, to give him the mission of killing Jake. A while later, Jake meets his son's closest friend, and during their conversation about the tragedy, he finds out that Fresh was seen with individuals dressed in black suits, much to the secret agents depicted in comic books, prior to the murder of his family. Before he can get any more information, Locke shows up and opens fire, so Jake pushes the kid into a shop before running away. Locke kills Kopilden, causing panacincher when the police eventually Locke shoot Shamasal. Jaka manages stojith wanwath at the wall, so Locke zouts mighty boros apolisakar, and sets off Toph and Dake. Jake is hiding at Earl's shop in the evening, thinking back to how Earl raised him when his parents passed away. Suddenly, the computer starts beeping to announce the arrival of the team, so Jake and Earl grab some weapons to fight them. Elias almost shoots Jake, but Earl stops him in his tracks. Then, Ajax fires at them while Brunner leaps on Jake and they start fighting on a car. Brunner turns around to yell at his carelessness, and Jake uses the chance to stab him with a screwdriver. When Ajax opens fire again, Jake uses the body as a shield and retrieves his gun to start shooting back, but he soon runs out of bullets. Ajax has a few left, but wastes them on purpose because he wants to fight Jake hand to hand again to prove he's better. As the guys start trading blows around the store, Ajax tries to knife Jake, but Mueller shoots him instead. After that, Jake makes sure Earl is okay and gives him his car keys so he can go because the police are about to arrive. Mueller explains to Jake later in the car that she helped him because she also wants to get out of Section 8. Jake requests to be brought to Ramsey's lodging since he doesn't think he can trust her. The next day, the duo arrives in Montana and tries to sneak through a forest to find Ramsey Saskabin, but when Jake turns around, he's suddenly knocked out. After dreaming of his family again, Jake wakes up tied to a chair in a room with Ramsey and Mueller, who has been working for Ramsey to set up this trap for Jake. Ramsey says he has a surprise and Jake is shocked to see Mason enter the room, learning he's been working with Ramsey as well. The organization had been needing an agent with Jake's skills, so Mason told them how to get to him. This means they were the ones to pay Fresh to kill his family. Jake can't believe Mason betrayed him, but Mason just says that Jake was wasting his talent on cars and a kid. Mason gives Ramsey and Mueller the money they agreed upon after the group leaves Jake alone. Mason concurs when Ramsey suggests killing Jake because he's a liability, but he takes a closer look. Mason visits Jake and releases him before disclosing the truth that he had been paid to destroy Section 8 from the inside and asks Jake to assist him in completing the task while Mueller counts the money. Then Mason sets off the alarm on purpose, and when two guards come to check, they quickly kill them. More men keep coming and the duo shoots them all as they make there to find Ramsey. As gunshots demolish their surrounds, another shootout breaks out. Ramsey shelters with Mueller and offers Jake the money that Mason gave him. When Jake flatly refuses, Ramsey tries to persuade him that Mason is solely to blame, but Jake doesn't buy it. Mueller tries to sneak up on Jake and shoot him as they are arguing, but Mason instructs him to move and takes the bullet instead, knocking Mueller down in the process. Jake rushes to check on his friend and Ramsey tries to grab the money, but Jake scares him off with a few shots. Then Mason asks Jake to finish the job and dies. At that moment, Mueller cuts in and tries to shoot Jake, but she's out of ammo, so they start fighting hand to hand instead. After exchanging a few hits, Mason stabs Jake in the shoulder, but he uses the chance to turn her own hand against her and kill her. Afterward, Jake goes outside and sees Ramsey flee in a car, so he steals a vehicle and goes after him. Both men open fire as they drive like crazy, and Ramsey gets so distracted that he ends up crashing. Jake walks over to the wreck, and when Ramsey insults him for hesitating, Jake finally kills him. The police take Jake to meet Mason's boss, General Savoy, in the evening. When Savoy asks Jake to join his team, he gives him a job and a fresh start, but Jake says he has nothing to fight for and turns down the offer. Savoy gives him his card anyhow, just in case. Later, when Jake gets home, Locke is waiting for him because he still needs to do the job because his reputation requires it. A hand-to-hand battle soon breaks out, and both men display incredible fighting prowess while attacking with any furniture or object in the room. When the fight moves to the kitchen, both of them grab a knife and keep hitting each other until Locke throws Jake on the floor. This allows Jake to retrieve his gun and finally kill Locke. Jake announces his departure from Earl in a voicemail he leaves him the following morning, thanking him for everything. While riding the bus in the meanwhile, Jake notices a woman and her son sharing a tender moment. Recollections of his own family resurface, and Jake phones Savoy to extend his offer, stating that he has a cause he is willing to fight for. Savoy greets him at Section 9 right away.